session, we talked about the Pharisees. They were the founders of Judaism. The Pharisees continued to operate and to promote the religion in the centuries after 70 AD. In this session, we will take a deeper look at those who helped the Romans destroy our homeland and the Temple of Jerusalem. So let's pick up where we left off in the last session, and I really encourage you to go back and listen to the last message regarding the founders of Judaism if you have not heard it. I'll leave the link in the description. I believe that it will be beneficial for you to hear it so that you can see how it ties into this message. Because what you need to understand is that there were different sects or religious groups in Judea before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. However, after the destruction, the Pharisees remain. How did they end up on top? So let's take a look at an excerpt from this journal article from New York University. The title is "The Pharisees and Their Legal Traditions According to the Dead Sea Scrolls." The article is sharing information uncovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In summary, it's telling us that they found information to verify a lot of what we see in the New Testament and the writings of Josephus and other rabbinic sources concerning the Pharisees and their role. So based on the information found in those scrolls, the Pharisees were described as those who removed the boundaries and taught false laws. If you look at it this way, the laws, statutes, and commandments served as boundaries for our people. You stay within the boundaries and you're safe. You step outside of it and your enemies can come in and overtake you. So the Pharisees were being accused of revising what Yah had commanded and adding their interpretations to it, and it led the people astray. They removed the boundaries. What was the result? The Romans came in and destroyed our homeland. It is also said that they spoke rebelliously against Yah's commandments, that they prophesied deceit and caused Israel to go astray. So they were called expounders of false laws. They were also accused of being dishonest in their teaching. Did Messiah say the same thing about them? So these scrolls are basically confirming that information. So it says the fundamental question facing all systems of post-biblical Jewish law is how to justify the existence of so significant a presence of clearly non-biblical laws. Just pause and think on that. The doctrine of the Pharisees are unbiblical. We know that. Why? They're mixed in with the truth. They mixed in lies, doctrines, traditions of men with the truth. And this is why Messiah warned the disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees. They mixed in things that would be detrimental to our people. It goes on to say that the Qumran, which is another name for the Dead Sea Scrolls, considered biblical law to be the revealed law. And the additional laws, these laws of the Pharisees, were called hidden laws. And this is why there's secret knowledge in that religion known as Judaism. Well, where did that secret knowledge come from? A better question is, who did it come from? Who did it come from? So these Idumeans, some of them, children of Esau, created an admixture to destroy the nation from within. And it opened the door so that the enemies could destroy it from without. The Pharisees said that these so-called hidden laws were revealed to them through inspired biblical exegesis in their regular study sessions. Exegesis is an explanation or interpretation of Scripture. So it says, little is known about the Pharisaic view except for the reports of later sources. So later Tanaitic sources say that the concept that the Pharisees held was what's called dual torah. Dual, as in two Torahs. It's based on an idea that Yah gave two Torahs to Israel at Sinai. What they're saying is he gave the revealed or written Torah, and then there's oral interpretations that should go with it. So you had the written and the oral law. Now listen to what Josephus says about the Pharisees. He says that the Pharisees were the leading experts in biblical interpretation. But he does not claim that they had divine inspiration for their teachings. It's noted, though, that the Sadducees rejected the extra biblical traditions of the Pharisees. So the Sadducees did not ascribe to the oral traditions. So here is what we need to understand. Leaven was added long before the Roman Catholic Church got their hands on our books. The so-called religious leaders in the land of Judea were already creating false doctrine. And this is why this passage here in 1 John 2:18 through 20 is so important. He says, little children, it is the last time. You have heard that the Antichrist will come, but you should know that there are many Antichrists, so there is more than one. Then he tells them that these Antichrists went out from us. In other words, they mixed themselves in with them, learned what they knew, and then went out and added leaven to deceive. So it happened, though, so that it would be revealed that they were impostors. But listen to what he says. If they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But listen to this key verse. He says, but you have an unction from the Holy One, and you know all things. What is he saying? You have the Ruach. The Holy Spirit is there to teach us so that we know all things. He helps us to rightly divide so that we can know what is of Yah and what is not. And that's critically important in these last days. We can't rely on head knowledge because deceptive doctrine can look like and sound like the real thing. We certainly have to pray for Yah to reveal to us who the people are who are laboring among us, because all are not true. Let's look at this from Mark 7:5 through 9. The Pharisees and certain of the scribes came to Messiah. Why did they come? They were trying to find fault. They saw that some of the disciples, some, not all, did not wash their hands before eating. So the Pharisees said they ate with defiled hands. Verse 3, listen, for the Pharisees and all the Yehudis, except they wash their hands oft, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. So listen, not only did they have to wash their hands, they had to wash cups, pots, vessels, and tables when they came from the market. So these Pharisees and scribes confronted Yeshua about this, and they basically said, hey, your disciples are not walking according to the tradition of the elders. Now, when you hear elders, you automatically think, oh, well, this must be talking about the laws given by Moses. But was it? Listen to how Messiah responded to them. He called them hypocrites. Why? They had an outward showing of godliness. And he quoted Isaiah where it said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. As a result, they worship in vain. And it doesn't stop there. He says, they teach for doctrine the commandments of men, and they lay aside. They don't abide by, they lay aside the commandment of Yah. Are you hearing this? They rejected the commandment of Yah to keep their own traditions. So I ask you, were they really keeping the laws of Yah? Based on this passage, no. So what are the origins of this law? Well, it's based on a passage in Exodus 30:17 through 21, where the Most High told Moses to make a laver of brass and his foot also of brass so that they could wash. And it says, thou shalt put it between the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, and thou shalt put water therein. Why? For Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet thereat. When they go into the tabernacle of the congregation, they shall wash with water, that they die not, or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn offering made by fire unto the Most High. So they shall wash their hands and their feet, that they die not. And it shall be a statute forever to them, even to him and to his seed throughout their generations. So we see this was a practice for Aaron and his sons because of their specific duties. But let's see how the Pharisees changed it before the time of Messiah, because they wanted all of the Yehudis to do it whenever they ate something. So this is called, or this is entitled, Origins of Netalat Yadayim. It says the tradition of Netalat Yadayim prior to eating bread originated with the rabbis of the Talmud. It derives from various practices concerning ritual impurity from when the ancient temple stood in Jerusalem. The priests who performed the temple rituals were given gifts of oil, wine, and wheat that could be eaten only after ritual washing. For various reasons, the ancient rabbis extended this practice to all Jews before eating meals. Some sources suggest that the practice was instituted so the temple's washing ritual would not be forgotten. Whatever the reason, the practice, incumbent upon both men and women, was established by Talmudic times and later included in the medieval codes of Jewish law. Some passages in the Talmud indicate that failing to wash hands before a meal is a significant transgression. Significant transgression. You all, one of the Talmudic sages even says that if you're not washing before you eat, this is the same as being with a prostitute. And we're going to see in the next passage that the Pharisees were shocked when Messiah didn't do it. So it's important to note that Messiah didn't condemn hand washing. He doesn't say there's anything wrong with washing your hand. He was dealing with the most important issue, and we find that here in Luke 11:37 through 39. He was speaking, and a certain Pharisee came to him to eat with him, basically. And he went in and sat down to eat. It says sat down to meat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. And so Messiah said unto him, now do you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. You're evil on the inside. He deals with the most important issue. You're so focused on the outside doing religious things that you ignore what's on the inside. What are we talking about? Motives. Your why. Those things come from the heart. So he's dealing with traditions that were meant to be oppressive And that's why he said they made the law burdensome. Now let's look at why they were rebuked. This comes from Deuteronomy 4:2. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Most High Yah, which I command you. And there's a confirmation in Deuteronomy 12:32. Whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it, nor take away from it. The Pharisees were doing both. And that's a great lead-in for our discussion about Josephus. We need to look at him because it is said that he was the most important Jewish historian from the 1st century AD. So we'll look at this journal article from the University of Zagreb entitled Life and Reliability of Josephus. We want to know, was he doing what the Pharisees were doing, mixing lies in with truth? According to this source, Josephus was called a Hellenized Jew, and this term was used for non-Greeks that adopted Greek culture, religion, their identity, and the language. So his writings provided what is said to be the most comprehensive extra-biblical description of the social, political, and religious context in which Christianity and the church were born. Now let's look at Josephus's early life. His Hebrew name was Yosef ben Mattatyahu, which means Joseph, son of Matthias. But he later adopted the name Flavius in honor of his Roman benefactor. That would have been Flavius Vespasian. So Flavius was the family name of the 1st century Roman emperors. We're talking about Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. So it's a Roman family name, meaning golden or yellow-haired. It was used by later emperors, and Constantine was one of them. So we notice here that Josephus chose to adopt the name of his paymaster. It says he was born in Jerusalem in AD 37. This is less than a decade after the death and resurrection of Messiah. Now listen, it says he belonged to a noble family with priestly roots. On his father's side, it is said that he descended from Aaron's lineage. And on his mother's side, it says he descended from the Hasmoneans. And they were the ruling dynasty that led to the Maccabean revolt. Now don't miss the fact that it says Josephus chose not to give his sons Hebrew names. Instead, he named his sons after Hyrcanus, Justus, and Agrippa. Who were they? Idumeans, Edomites. So we need to talk about the right to rule. And we're going to take our time with this because there's a lot to cover. The goal here is for us to have some understanding of how folks assumed these positions of power. And there's no way that I can cover it all, so please continue digging on your own. I usually confirm things in several resources before using the one that I think explains it in its simplest terms, but there are great sources out there, so please keep digging. So we'll look at this article, and it's called Who Were the Hasmoneans? Let's take a look at this. So it says the Hasmoneans were a rural priestly family whose members later arose to occupy the office of the high priest and later styled themselves as kings. So it says in both cases they acted as usurpers. And most of you know that after the death of Alexander the Greek, his generals divided his empire and then began fighting each other. Judea fell to Ptolemy I, and it was during his reign that the Pentateuch was translated into Greek. Continuing, it says under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and this was between 215 and 164 BCE, it says the Seleucid government joined the ongoing civil war in Judea between the rural traditionalists and the Hellenizing urban elites. And then in 167 BCE, they erected an altar to Zeus and sacrificed swine in the temple. Our other practices like circumcision, they banned it. So because of this, folks were not going to take this lying down. So they had a lot of uprisings. The result was the rise of the Hasmoneans, this family of priests. And Mattathias and his 5 sons became the leaders in the land. Why? Because they were willing to fight against the enemies. So listen, it says in 141 BCE, a large assembly adopted a resolution. Now this was a resolution of the priests and the people and the elders of the land, that Shimon, the second son of Mattathias, would be their leader and high priest forever, until there should arise a faithful prophet. Please don't miss the significance of what happened here. The people came into agreement to appoint them and put them in power. But the Hasmoneans were regarded as illegitimate kings. Who put them in power? The leaders, and some of the people came into agreement to do this because that family had fought against their enemies. But was it ordained by Yah for them to lead this high priestly ministry? So when Messiah said they sit in the seat of Moses, who put them there? Note that he did not say they sit in the seat of Aaron. Interesting, right? He didn't say Aaron, he said Moses. Why? We'll get there. So if you read the first book of Maccabees, you can read the rest of this story. 2 years later, after they appointed Shimon as their ruler, the Romans recognized this newly found state as a Roman republic. So a key development during this time is that the Pharisees and Sadducees came into positions of power because of everything happening during the times of the Maccabees. Listen, it says in 96 BCE, the Sadducee Hasmonean king Alexander Yani opened a bloody 8-year civil war against his more pietous Pharisee opponents while using Greek mercenaries. So it says the Pharisees can be seen among the most Iranianized Jewish groups of the Second Temple period. Now listen, because this part is really important. After the Hasmoneans came to power, they tried to bring stability to the land. They brought together the diverse groups. We're talking about bringing in the Sumerians, the Idumeans, talking about children of Esau, folks with different ideals, beliefs, etc. And they said, you're now Jews. Now think about this conversion, particularly as it pertains to the Edomites. These descendants of Abraham and Isaac were now circumcised and accepted as Jews. Think about what this means. They were not children of Jacob, but they're now identified as one of his sons, Judah. They were Jewish, and that's the appropriate term there because they were converting them to a religion. They mixed in with the bloodline descendants of Jacob. Again, do you now see why it says all Israel is not Israel? But think about the rights that came with that title. Let's look at another corroborating source, and this is from the Torah, and the title is The Hasmoneans Usurped the High Priesthood from the Oniads. It says the family of Onias long controlled the high priesthood before the persecution of Antiochus IV and the Hasmoneans, referring to the Maccabees, rebellion. When the dust settled, the Hasmoneans found themselves in charge of the priesthood, and the Oniads had relocated to Egypt. It goes on to say, indeed, Mattathias' father was named Johanan, as we learn from his introduction in 1 Maccabees. And it reads, "In those days there arose from Jerusalem Mattathias, son of John, Johanan, son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, and took up residence in Modiin. And yet Johanan, the father of Mattathias, was not the high priest Johanan known in Greek sources as Onias, a nickname for Johanan. Indeed, Mattathias was not a scion of a high priestly family, and justifying the fact that his sons and grandsons ended up with the high priesthood, which was then the equivalent of ruling Judea, is the focus and point of the Hasmoneans' court history. Now again, we're looking at how they came into the positions of power. So this is telling the story of the transformation of Judea from a province of a Hellenistic kingdom into an independent state. First Maccabees begins in the 160s BCE with Antiochus IV Epiphanes ruling Judea and persecuting Judaism, and ends with a Jewish priest, John Hyrcanus, succeeding his father as ruler of Judea in 134 BCE. More specifically, First Maccabees tells the story of the transformation of Judea, clarifying to its readers that Mattathias and his sons began and successfully led that rebellion, and that, therefore, it was appropriate that his family rule Judea. But again, the question is, was it ordained by the Most High? Now it says, in sum, the problem of pedigree was acute for the Hasmoneans because other candidates held better credentials for the high priesthood, talking about the Zadokites, who were ready to emphasize how ineligible the Hasmoneans were. But it says, First Maccabees simply ignores the high priest who preceded the Hasmoneans, thus avoiding the question of the Hasmoneans' right to supplant the Oniads. In contrast, Second Maccabees, which had no pro-Hasmonean agenda, goes into great detail about the high priest that came before Judah Maccabees' rebellion. It tells how Onias, the legitimate high priest, was displaced by his brother Jason. Soon after, Menelaus, the brother of Onias's longtime rival Simon, outbribed Jason and took the high priesthood himself. Now, it goes on to say, beginning in the late century BCE, everything changed when John Hyrcanus' sons, Aristobulus and Alexander Janai, proclaimed themselves kings. It says the growth of the state sidelined the issue of the high priesthood and its incumbents' pedigree. In other words, okay, this is a non-issue. We're not going to focus on this anymore. At that point, the Sadducees would come around and join the Hasmonean coalition, while the Pharisees would move to the opposition. Attitudes toward Jewish law would become more important than details of lineage. So it says the first step in this transformative process was when the Hasmoneans, finding themselves at the head of a successful war for Judea's independence from the Seleucid kingdom, decided that instead of returning the high priesthood to the Oniads, they would take the mantle themselves. Now let's go back to the journal article talking about the early life of Josephus, but we needed to know about his lineage. Now it goes on to tell us that he was very bright. It says he mastered the Greek language and wrote his works in Greek. Later, at the age of 16, he decided to join one of the three Jewish sects, We're talking about the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. It is said that he spent some time among all three, trying to figure out which one would be the best fit for him. Then he would go on and join another group living in the wilderness with this man named Bannus. And after that, he returned to Jerusalem and adopted the principles of the Pharisees. By doing that, it allowed him to climb the stage of public and political life in Judea. So we can take a guess as to how many true bloodline Israelites would have been climbing the social ladder of success during that time. So let's remind ourselves that at an early age, Josephus wanted to align himself with the nation's sects or religious groups. And we covered in the last session that most of the Pharisees were Idumean converts. They had inserted their oral laws, oral traditions, into our writings. So listen to Josephus's words. He says, "When I was about 16 years old, I intended to have acquaintance with our nation's sects, and they are three. The first being the Pharisees, the second Sadducees, and the third Essenes. Just as we have said many times, if I should observe them all, I thought that in this way I would choose the best. So after immersing myself in an austere life and working hard at many things, I went through the three." He says, "After I found that the experience received from the three was not sufficient for me, and when I learned that one with the name of Bannus resides in the wilderness, who had his clothing from the trees," so he was using leaves, "and his nourishment set before him from the things growing on their own, and who washed with cold water day and night many times for purity, I became his adherent. And after I had lived with him for 3 years and had completed my desire, I went back to the city. Now being in my 19th year, I began to be involved in politics, following the sect of the Pharisees, which is similar to what is called the Stoic sect among the Greeks." Now let's continue reading about his early life from this source in Britannica. It says, "Returning to Jerusalem, he joined the Pharisees, a fact of crucial importance in understanding his later collaboration with the Romans. The Pharisees, despite the unflattering portrayal of them in the New Testament, were for the most part intensely religious Jews and adhered to a strict, though non-literal, observance of the Torah. Politically, however, the Pharisees had no sympathy with the intense Jewish nationalism of such sects as the military patriotic zealots, and were willing to submit to Roman rule if only the Jews could maintain their religious independence. So why would the Pharisees object to Yehudis wanting their land back, wanting their independence? Why? So there were different skirmishes going on during that time. But it says in AD 64, Josephus was sent on an embassy to Rome to secure the release of a number of Jewish priests of his acquaintance who were held prisoners in the capital. Now, let's just stop and think about that. He was sent to help secure their release. Would you say he had some clout? Obviously so, because he was given the opportunity to meet the wife of Nero. Listen, it says, her generous favor enabled him to complete his mission successfully. Listen to what else it says. During his visit, Josephus was deeply impressed with Rome's culture and sophistication, and especially its military might. So what happened when he returned to Jerusalem? Well, it says on his return, there was a revolt against Roman rule. 2 years later, in AD 66, the Israelites in Judea, urged on by the fanatical zealots, the people who wanted to fight for their freedom, they ousted the Roman leader and set up their own government in Jerusalem. They wanted to take their country back. So Josephus, along with many others of the priestly class, counseled them to compromise with the Romans. But it says instead, he was drawn reluctantly into the rebellion. Now listen, despite his moderate stance, he was appointed military commander of Galilee. Now, this part is hard for me to believe. Even though he was a moderate, they appointed this man as the military commander, and he wasn't that passionate about their cause. Listen, it says he was appointed military commander of Galilee, where, if his own untrustworthy account may be believed, so even the writer of this article is having a hard time believing this, it says he was obstructed in his efforts at conciliation by the enmity of the local partisans led by John of Giscala. Listen, though realizing the futility of armed resistance, so he knew this is not going to work. It says he nevertheless set about fortifying the towns of the north against the forthcoming Roman juggernaut. So how many of you would follow someone who's not 100% on board with the mission? Well, I don't know, guys. I really think this is a bad idea. I really think we should give in, but I'll lead you into battle. So it says the Romans, under the command of the future emperor Vespasian, arrived in Galilee in the spring of AD 67 and quickly broke the Jewish resistance in the north. Josephus managed to hold the fortress of Jotapata for 47 days. But after the fall of the city, he took refuge with 40 diehards in a nearby cave. Listen, there, to Josephus's consternation, the beleaguered party voted to perish rather than surrender. It's like, we're not going out like that. We just rather end our lives. It says Josephus, arguing the immorality of suicide, proposed this now, listen. He proposed that each man in turn should dispatch his neighbor. The order to be determined by casting lots. So listen, guys, don't kill yourself. We can't do that. We'll just, you kill him, I'll kill you, that type of stuff. So they decided to cast lots. And it says Josephus contrived to draw the last lot. And as one of the 2 surviving men in the cave, he prevailed upon his intended victim to surrender to the Romans. Family, come on now. The group made a pact that we will not be taken alive, and it just so happens that the man who was not fully on board draws the last lot and then changed his mind about following through on the plan after everyone else has taken out their partner. But let's go on. So he surrendered, and he was led in chains before Vespasian. And then it says he assumes the role of a prophet, and he prophesied to Vespasian, telling him that he would soon become emperor. So apparently this came true after Nero died in AD 68, and Josephus had to serve as a prisoner for 2 years, but then later Vespasian became emperor in AD 69. As a result of this, Vespasian set Josephus free because of that prophecy. And it says Josephus attached himself to the Roman cause, not the cause of his people, to the Roman cause. This is when he changed his name. Now listen to this. It says he later joined the Roman forces under the command of Vespasian's son Titus at the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. It says he attempted to act as mediator between the Romans and the rebels, but hated by the Yehudis for his apostasy and distrusted by the Romans as a Jew, he was able to accomplish little. Following the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, Josephus took up residence in Rome, where he devoted the remainder of his life to literary pursuits under imperial patronage. So he was living large after that, you all. It says in Rome he was granted citizenship and a pension. He was a favorite at the courts of the emperors, and he enjoyed the income from a tax-free estate in Judea. So later he began writing an official story of the revolt, and it says he was hated by the Yehudis. The Israelites hated him. They deemed him a turncoat and a traitor. Listen to what he did. He began writing the story or the history of the Israelites from creation to just before the revolt of AD 66 to 70. But it says this was an attempt to present Judaism to the Hellenistic world in a favorable light by virtually ignoring the prophets, by embellishing biblical narratives, and by stressing the rationality of Judaic laws and institutions. He stripped Judaism of its fanaticism and, listen, made it appealing to the cultivated and reasonable man. Interesting, right? So let's look at some excerpts from this article from the New York Times. It's entitled Rome Through the Eyes of Flavius Josephus. And if you look at the caption under the image, it's telling you that here is a ruin at the edge of the Jewish ghetto in Rome. Name a group of people known for living in ghettos. Let's go on. So listen, this historian Mary Beard says Josephus was the luckiest traitor ever. It says Flavius Josephus was a first-century Jewish general who threw in his lot with the Roman legions that destroyed his homeland. When Titus and his father Vespasian returned to Rome after the Judean War to inaugurate the Flavian dynasty, successor to the Julio-Claudian dynasty that Augustus founded and Nero destroyed, Josephus went with them. So a German writer calls Josephus the Jew of Rome. Others call him a turncoat, an asylum seeker, pragmatic visionary. It says historians have long debated Josephus's motives and character. What's indisputable is that most of what is known about the violent encounter between Rome and Judea during this period comes out of his work. What's astonishing is that with a sharp eye and a bit of research, you can still walk in Josephus's footsteps in contemporary Rome. Where but in the eternal city is it possible to map a 2,000-year-old eyewitness account onto an intact urban fabric? Now, I want to look at this source from the University of Chicago Press so that you can hear what Josephus said to Vespasian after he was taken captive. It says, "Then when he was taken captive by the Romans, Josephus petitioned for an audience with Vespasian. He predicted that General Vespasian would soon be hailed as emperor. Listen to what he said to him. 'You are master not only of me, Caesar, but of land and sea and all the human race.'" So he's saying this was the prophecy that was fulfilled, and as a result, the personal circumstances of Josephus were improved. Meanwhile, the position of the Yehudis collapsed. Josephus, now interpreter and an advisor to Titus, was present to watch it happen. He witnessed the terrible siege of Jerusalem. Afterward, he traveled to Rome, where he saw firsthand the triumph and lived under the patronage of successive Flavian emperors, writing his many volumes. But you know what you don't see a lot of when you read his writings? You don't see words describing his grief and sorrow about the destruction or what happened to the nation. He seems very detached to me. He seems detached from those who are supposed to be his people. So it goes on to say, like other spectators in Rome, the Jewish historian marveled at the triumph of Vespasian and Titus. Unlike others, Josephus had fought against Rome in the war. Even so, many scholars have suggested that Josephus's direct experience of war exerted less influence over his writing than the desire to please his Flavian patrons. This problem has long divided historians into two camps. The overall situation is neatly summarized in the Encyclopedia Judaica. So this is what is said. On this subject there are opposing views. By some, he is regarded as a traitor who deserted his people in their hour of need, that he defected to the enemy, and he's acting as the apologist of the Romans and distorting facts. The other view is that, well, he was essentially a Pharisee who acted in conformity with this outlook and had faith in the future of a Jewish people whose survival depended on submission to Rome. But both sides agree that Josephus was compromised in some way by his position. The debate is over intention. Was Josephus corrupted by his service to the Flavian household? Or was he just spinning his writings to provide cover for his people and to hasten the restoration of the people to their homeland? The prophets and the priests of old, they wept because of the calamity that befell our people. Even Messiah wept over the city. They knew we had it coming, but they expressed sorrow because of the calamity, because of their connections. For many of you, when you found out we were the people, it brought about great joy and great sadness, sorrow. I know it did for me. And those emotions are still there, even though I was not there when our ancestors rebelled and got kicked out of the land. It's the fact that this happened to our people. So when you read the work of Josephus, he seems very detached, and it's odd to me. So many believe, and rightly so, that he was writing to please a specific audience. And by doing that, it benefited our enemies, not us. But should we disregard all of his writings? No, there's a reason we are told to study and rightly divide. We have to uncover the truth they tried to hide. So let's look at this from Bible.org, because there are others who question the validity of his writing. It says the question of the historical reliability of Josephus can only be answered by attempting to correlate what he asserts in his writings with other sources, some of which he used, whether literature, archaeology, etc., and when no such external knowledge exists to confirm or deny his report, we must consider internal evidence, his habits, what kind of man he says he was, etc., to see whether certain of his claims are credible. At this point, we are closer to guessing than in the first situation. Given the above canons, it is no mystery that many scholars hold that Josephus is woefully inaccurate at times, and it would appear from the work of these individuals they list here, it says that such a conclusion is fairly warranted. Yet this skepticism does not need to be thoroughgoing, for there are many places where it appears that he has left for us a solid record of people and events, especially as regards the broad movements in history at this time. These might include facts about the Herodian dynasty, the nature of the Jewish religious sects, Roman rule over Palestine, and the fall of Jerusalem. So Boschi agrees that in many places Josephus errs regarding numbers and names, but this is no grounds for dismissing all that he has said without foundation. Once again, the historical trustworthiness of Josephus is perhaps not a flat declaration. He is or he is not, but rather it proceeds on a case-by-case basis. So yes, we have to weed through a lot of this and rely on the Ruach. And remember that this was all prophesied. First Enoch 104:9 says, "And though you sinners say, all our sins shall not be searched out and written down, nevertheless all your sins shall be recorded every day. And now I show you that light and darkness, day and night, see all your sins. Don't be godless in your hearts, and do not lie, nor alter the words of uprightness, nor charge with lying the words of the Holy Great One, nor take account of your idols. For all your lying and all your godlessness do not result in righteousness, but in great sin." Listen, "And now I know this mystery, that sinners will alter and pervert the words of righteousness in many ways." And that is certainly what the Pharisees did, the scribes and the Pharisees. It says, "And will speak wicked words and lie." They lie. Why? For their own advantage. What else does it say? It says, "They will practice great deceits and write books concerning their words. But when they write down truthfully all my words," look, "even in their languages, and do not change or diminish anything from my words, but write them all down truthfully, all that I first testified concerning them, then I know another mystery, that books will be given to the righteous and the wise, to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom." Family, is it not in the Most High's control to cause his truth to come forth? It's certainly happening right now. If it's for us to know the truth, then we know that he will cause his truth to come forth. It's the truth that you know that will make you free. So there's more to cover with this, more for us to dig through and sort through. But I hope this message has been a blessing to you. Please remember to hit the like and to share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload the messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Until next time, be blessed, family.